Hello. Today I'm going to talk about my top 20 neo-noir films. Usually I do top 10 lists, but this was a difficult list to tackle because there's just too many options. And I'm going to try to keep it short, so each entry is going to be very concise. There may be one or two that I go in a little deeper on. You know, there's neo-noir and then there's noir, and I'm probably going to do a video on noir at a later date, which I really love, but I feel like a lot of people these days don't really watch older movies. So, and when I say older movies, I mean more than 50 years old. Yeah, I'm going to do that, but I want to get this list out of the way because I'd say about half of this list has come out in the last 20 years. The other half are a bit older. So before I get into that, I'm going to just mention a couple of things that I did not put on this list. One is the Sin City movies, and although I like them, and I guess you could classify them as noir, I feel like they're a little bit like parodies of noir or self-referential. I tried to kind of stay clear from that kind of thing. And I also did not include any of the Coen brother movies. I know that might be sacrilege, but films like No Country for Old Men are amazing films. However, I feel like the Coens only take a small part of noir. In the case of No Country for Old Men, it's mainly a Western with noir elements. And I would say most of their films are comedies with noir elements. There is one comedy on this list, but it's more of a noir with comedy instead of the other way around. That's what I left off the list. If that upsets you, I'm sorry, but let's get into it. So at number 20, we have Inherent Vice from 2014 by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Joaquin Phoenix, Josh Brolin, and Owen Wilson. Set in 1970s Los Angeles, a stoner private detective navigates a labyrinth of strange characters and bizarre conspiracies to solve the case of his missing ex-girlfriend. This movie is quite funny. It's funnier than I expected it to be. It's a bit surreal and it's kind of psychedelic. I would say it feels very accurate for the time period, which I think Anderson did a good job of showing. It's quite complex and it's quite long. It's got this kind of twisting narrative, and I did find it a little hard to follow at times, but just the wackiness, I think, sells it, in my opinion. The quirky humor might not be for everyone, but I liked a lot of the jokes. They're kind of jokes that you get a few seconds later. You're like, oh, that's funny. I'm not sure if this is a faithful adaptation of the novel. I've never read it, so if someone wants to comment about that in the comments, they can. But I knew I would love this film based on the song that kind of opens the movie up, and that is from a band called Can, which I really love. It's a German krautrock band. And as soon as I heard them playing, I was like, I'm gonna like this movie. So yeah, I think it's a good film, and it is the only kind of comedy on this list. At number 19, we have Angel Heart from 1987, directed by Alan Parker, starring Mickey Rourke, Robert De Niro, and Lisa Bonet. A private investigator is hired to track down a missing man, only to be drawn into a dark and eerie world where nothing is as it seems. This film blends noir and horror, delivering a chilling tale of identity and the supernatural. So this is one of the few films that's actually set in the kind of noir time. Many of the neo-noirs are set in present day with that kind of element in it, but this one is actually in that time, and it's quite atmospheric and a bit eerie. You know, there's some of it is a little hammy at times. There's really strong performances by Mickey Rourke and De Niro. These days I'm not that big of a fan of De Niro, but back at this time I think he was hitting on all cylinders, and his portrayal in this of the devil, spoilers, is quite good, I think. It's quite engaging. The cinematography is pretty good. I did like the attention to detail with the kind of voodoo stuff in the film. You know, a lot of it is in the surroundings of New Orleans. There's a little bit of it in New York City as well. Yeah, I mean, I think Mickey Rourke is an actor that if he had died like shortly after this, maybe he would have been of James Dean level. If you've ever seen Rumblefish, you know that he had that in him. However, you know, I'm not saying he's not a bad actor. He's still a great actor. The things in his personal life have kind of overshadowed how great of an actor he is, I think. But he's really good in this. So I would check it out. At number 18, we have Body Heat from 1981, directed by Lawrence Kasdan, starring William Hurt, Kathleen Turner, and Richard Crenna. A small-town lawyer falls for a seductive woman and is drawn into a plot to murder her wealthy husband. I'm just going to say it, this movie is quite hot. There are a few films on this list that lean into the kind of steamy side, which I think is definitely an element of noir. In this one, it's front and center. It's quite atmospheric, and again, it's kind of set in the South, so there's this southern kind of mystery vibe where everything is hot and sticky. Kathleen Turner is amazing in this movie. She kills it. You know, a lot of people just think of her from Roger Rabbit, but in this film, I think she really nails her role. In most cases, this just feels like a classic noir that was just filmed later. One thing that I did not like about it was I hated the music. It was kind of too on point, almost to the point where it became kind of parody, as this sort of detective jazz going on for a lot of the movie. Not the second half, mainly the first half. I think they're trying to set the tone, but I actually think it would have benefited from not having that. If it would have just had a regular score, I think it would have been a lot better. There is super intense chemistry by William Hurt and Kathleen Turner. Their relationship is quite sexy. There's one scene in particular that really jumps out, which kind of illustrates the madness of desire and longing, and it has to do with a window. I'm not going to say what it is, in case you haven't seen the film, but when it happens, I just my mouth kind of dropped to the floor because I'm trying to imagine it in real life. Doing that, you know, like any person, I've been in love and I've been in lust, and you know, there's times where you kind of can't control yourself, but in this situation, it's just so over the top that I'm just trying to imagine ever doing something like that, and I don't know if I could or would, but it works really well in the film. So anyway, at number 17, we have The Killer from 2023, directed by David Fincher, starring Michael Fassbender and Tilda Swinton. A methodical hitman navigates a moral crisis as his meticulous approach to his work begins to unravel after a job goes wrong. The film is a tense, noir-infused examination of guilt, obsession, and the cold efficiency of violence. So a lot of noirs have this kind of voyeurism thing going on, and that's what this film is 100%. It's actually kind of a double voyeurism because he is sort of watching his targets, but then you're watching him. And you could even say there's a triple voyeurist thing going on because the director is also filming him, so there's all these different angles about that. But I mean, the main draw for this movie, I think, is Fincher's attention to detail. Like The Killer, he is methodical in his direction. I would say the early part of the movie, the kind of setup, is just really amazing in terms of the meticulous quality of it. Michael Fassbender is amazing as usual. The ending is a little strange, but I did like it. There's kind of a bleakness to it. Some of the directors on this list, it was hard to choose one film from them, and David Fincher is one of them. This was the first of the films that I chose of his. At number 16, we have Prisoners from 2013, directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Hugh Jackman, Jake Gyllenhaal, and Viola Davis. Two families are torn apart when their daughters go missing, leading one father to take matters into his own hands as the police investigation stalls. You know, in some ways this is more of a thriller, but I do think it fits into the kind of neo-noir template. It's quite intense, and there's powerful performances by Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal. It's quite dark. There's these kind of thought-provoking themes about morality and justice. And, you know, that's one thing that is in a lot of noirs, is the people kind of taking the law into their own hands. There are so many great elements about noir, like the crime elements and the femme fatale elements, but that's one part that I think a lot of noirs have, is how the line between polite society and the crime world kind of like shifts, and people that you wouldn't think would be a criminal kind of cross the line and vice versa. I did consider putting Enemy on this list. I really love that film, but I actually think it's more of an uncanny film than a noir, so I decided to leave it off. At number 15, we have Memento from 2000, directed by Christopher Nolan, starring Guy Pearce, Carrie-Anne Moss, and Joe Pantoliano. A man with short-term memory loss uses a system of notes and tattoos to track down the person he believes killed his wife. This film is an innovative, non-linear thriller that explores themes of memory, identity, and revenge. Yeah, I mean, the way the story is built is just phenomenal. And it's one of those films you have to see several times. Guy Pearce nails it. The plot is very tightly constructed, and if you know Nolan's films, you know how much he, kind of like David Fincher, there's this definite meticulous quality to his films. But in Nolan's case, it has to do with kind of time and memory and all these other things. So I think he does it a little differently. But I think it works very well in this film. I will say this is not my favorite Nolan film, maybe Inception or The Prestige, but it's quite suspenseful and engaging, although it does feel a little dated, and I do feel that way about some of Nolan's films as I look back. I recently watched The Dark Knight, and it definitely felt kind of its time, so I don't know how well that's going to age. At number 14, we have Oldboy from 2003, directed by Park Chan-wook, starring Choi Min-sik. A man is inexplicably imprisoned for 15 years and then released, sparking a quest for vengeance against those who wronged him. This film is brutal. If you know Korean cinema, sometimes they really go for it. And in this case, they do. It doesn't shy away from taboo content. It has a twist-filled narrative and some unforgettable action sequences, especially the sequence in the hallway. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. It's quite stylish, and I think Choi Min-sik does an outstanding performance in this as the old boy. And if you've seen my Exuma video, link is up here. He is a really interesting Korean actor if you don't know his work, and I think in this is his best movie for sure. I do refuse to watch the remake. I just can't do it. Convince me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I just can't do it. At number 13, we have Heat from 1995, directed by Michael Mann, starring Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, and Val Kilmer. A master thief and a dedicated detective face off in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, each pushing the other to their limits. This one is the big crime saga, and I think it really works. I like Michael Mann's films. They're always very tight. There's some gripping action sequences, especially the shootout in the street. There's stellar performances by everybody. Pacino, De Niro, Val Kilmer is great in this film too. There are complex character dynamics, and the play between De Niro and Pacino is quite fascinating and magnetic. All in all, I think it's a great film. Some people might think it should be higher on this list, but there are just other films I think beat it out. At number 12, we have LA Confidential from 1997, directed by Kurt Hansen, starring Kevin Spacey, Russell Crowe, Guy Pearce, and Kim Basinger. Three LAPD officers with very different methods and morals work together to solve a series of murders in 1950s Los Angeles. So this film has excellent period detail. Actually, this would be one of the other ones that is kind of set in the past. It has strong character development, great performances, but I would say notably by Russell Crowe. He just is electrifying in this film. Kevin Spacey and Kim Basinger also deliver. I think in some ways she's a bit underrated, but she's in some great films. And, you know, Kevin Spacey has dealt with a lot of turmoil in the last few years, but when you look back on some of these films, his performances, yeah, they're just great. And he definitely delivers in this. At number 11, we have Drive from 2011, directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, starring Ryan Gosling, Carey Mulligan and Bryan Cranston. A stoic getaway driver becomes entangled in a dangerous scheme after falling for his neighbor, leading to violent consequences. So this film is super stylish, and I actually want to say a little bit more about it because I watched it again recently and I hadn't seen it in several years. And yeah, I just think it really works, and it is actually a lot better than I remember it to be. It's got a mesmerizing soundtrack, probably one of the best soundtracks of all time. All in all, like if you were to do it pound for pound, you know, some people might say Pulp Fiction or Saturday Night Fever, but I definitely think this film is in the running. Ryan Gosling's performance channels Steve McQueen. He says a lot with very little. A lot of the expressions on his face, he's hard to read, but you can definitely tell things are going on in his mind, so it gives this kind of enigmatic quality to his performance. The cinematography is stunning. There's this synergy between the synthwave soundtrack and the images that just, it really works. It almost makes LA feel, I don't know how to explain it, electrifying or something. It's gripping, it's got very minimalist storytelling. The supporting cast delivers excellent performances as well. It's got this amazing design, like I said, but one thing I want to point out is the typography. The opening credits, it's this kind of luscious cursive, and it just goes really well with the music and the cinematography. The costume design, the main character's jacket with the scorpion is just perfect, and it's iconic, and it just fits with everything really well. I think this movie is great. Number 10 is Nightcrawler from 2014, directed by Dan Gilroy, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, Rene Russo, and Riz Ahmed. A driven, morally ambiguous man dives into the world of crime journalism in Los Angeles, capturing grisly footage for profit. I could have put this before Drive. I had kind of a hard time deciding between the two, where they should go. And I think what actually edges that film out a little is Jake Gyllenhaal's creepy performance. This could be his best performance. He is almost the worst that could be drummed up, and that's saying a lot because, you know, there's mass murderers and all these other things, but something about his detached, voyeuristic examination of everything, it just really is unsettling. A serial killer or something, I think you could kind of understand because they're getting some thrill. There's some kind of reward. In this, his reward is just the kind of notoriety of getting to these crashes, but there's obviously the financial part, but I don't think he really cares that much about that. I think it's more about this cynical kind of obsession with the media. It's a pretty strong critique of the media and the ethics behind it, and when you're watching it, it all feels quite slimy. All great noirs have kind of a central character that goes through a kind of descent, and I think his descent is gripping to watch. At number 9, we have Blowout from 1981, directed by Brian De Palma, starring John Travolta, Nancy Allen, and John Lithgow. A sound technician accidentally records evidence of a political assassination and becomes embroiled in a deadly conspiracy. I'm just gonna say this plainly, I adore Brian De Palma. I just can't get enough of the guy. I have rewatched his films many, many times. And you know, he's known for certain ones more than others, like Scarface and Untouchables and Mission Impossible and Carrie. But if you go deeper into his filmography, there are some excellent examples of thriller and noir. This being one of them, but films like Obsession and Body Double and Dressed to Kill and Femme Fatale, they are all just riveting to watch. This is John Travolta's best performance, in my opinion. I do think he's good in Pulp Fiction as well. I think this is his best dramatic performance. The film is visually dynamic, like most of De Palma's films. I mean, the main thing to say about De Palma is that he is a master of manipulating an audience. He uses split screen a lot, and I don't think a lot of directors actually use it, especially anymore. Maybe in the old days, yes, but not really now. The only person I can think of that it's used it recently is probably Quentin Tarantino. De Palma is a master of it, and he is able to take you on separate threads at the same time, to the point where the threads inform each other and they create tension between them. And there's so much logistical preparation that has to go into these scenes that it just baffles me. And when you watch them, it's breathtaking. So in this film in particular, the sound design is impeccable, which is interesting because a lot of De Palma's films have this self-referential kind of parody going on. And in this one, that happens because the sound design is great in the film, but then inside the film, the sound design is very important as well. And it's really interesting in the opening scene because there's this fake out, and that's another great thing that De Palma is excellent at, is the subversion of tropes, where you think something's going to happen and then he kind of twists it around, but he can also do the double subversion where he twists it again, so you just never know what's going to happen, which is very refreshing. I think the film critiques a lot of political corruption and media manipulation. De Palma's films make me engaged like no other director, almost to the point where I feel like we're having a dialogue or some kind of game is being played. And I just don't ever feel that with other directors. And at the end of this film, I'm not going to spoil it, but the kind of last scene when you realize what happens, it's just a quintessential De Palma twisting of the details to just put it in this place. And yeah, it just works. Number 8, we have Basic Instinct from 1992, directed by Paul Verhoeven, starring Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone. A detective becomes entangled in a seductive and dangerous game with a mysterious author who may be a ruthless killer. The film is known for its provocative themes, sharp dialogue, and one of the most iconic performances of the 90s. This is perhaps the most notorious neo-noir, I think, and it is extremely sexy. I think it gives Body Heat a run for its money. Sharon Stone's performance is iconic and she destroys this movie. I can't even really imagine anyone else in the role, and I think she just ate it up. So yeah, I think the film is stylish, it's provocative. I saw this for the first time when I worked at a movie theater, and I was, probably around 20 or something, and actually I think I might have been a little younger, maybe 19, and it knocked my socks off. I wasn't really ready for it, and it kind of got me into this genre more, so I owe a little debt to it, and that might be why it's so high on this list. But the other thing is I saw it so many times when I worked at the theater that I really got an appreciation for it, aside from all the sexy stuff. Yeah, I mean, this and RoboCop, Verhoeven just blew my mind back then. I didn't really know what the hell these films are because they're just so kind of over the top and they have this satire to them. But there's this kind of edge that I appreciate about them, especially watching them now and looking back. I think they're quite maverick. And yeah, I think his films just get better with time. And this one does as well. It has a really good soundtrack, and Michael Douglas is great in it, and the story is just really interesting. At number 7, we have Blue Velvet from 1986, directed by David Lynch, starring Kyle MacLachlan, Isabella Rossellini, and Dennis Hopper. A young man undercovers the dark underbelly of his seemingly idyllic suburban town, leading him into a nightmarish world of violence and corruption. So this one kind of shows the underbelly of America more than I think some of the other ones, of the kind of suburban, showing the darkness under suburbia, which is a Lynch trademark, I think. It's disturbing and surreal, like many of Lynch's films. It has masterful direction, by one of my favorite directors. I love Lynch. I say more about it in my top 10 David Lynch films video. You can check that out if you want to. I'm not going to go too far into it here. I just think it's a great film, and it definitely deserves to be this high on the list. At number 6, we have Seven, directed by David Fincher, starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Kevin Spacey. Two detectives hunt a serial killer whose crimes are based on the 7 deadly sins, leading them into a dark and twisted game of morality. So this film is dark, and it's the second film on this list by David Fincher. And yeah, I had a hard time deciding between the two and where they should go. I really like The Killer, but I think Seven is just Fincher's kind of masterpiece. So yeah, I just had to go with it up high on the list too, because part of me wanted to push it down because it's a bit more of a horror film in a way, but it's just too good. All of the performances are great. Pitt, Freeman are awesome, but Kevin Spacey steals this film. I do think that Gwyneth Paltrow does a great job with the limited time that she's on screen. I think she really gets you to have feelings for them as a couple, and obviously if you know the film, that plays a big part in it, so I think she does a good job with that. It is thought-provoking, and the themes of sin and morality are really interesting things to contend with. It is so unsettling. A lot of the crime scenes, when they go into them, you just feel it in your gut. I saw recently that Spacey said that he fought to keep his name hidden before the release. And I think that was an excellent move, because I remember when I saw this in the theater for the first time and he just was there, it was like, oh my God. And it's like a shock, and it really works. Yeah, I think the ending is gut-wrenching. All of the actors deliver in this scene. And I do think the ending propels this film up on the list. I just think it really works. And I rewatched this recently, and it holds up. A little bit of it is a bit of its time. The kind of, you know, industrial music type stuff, and I think that could, you know, make it dated, but all in all, I think it transcends its time. At number 5, we have Mulholland Drive from 2001, directed by David Lynch, starring Naomi Watts, Laura Herring, and Justin Theroux. A woman suffering from amnesia teams up with an aspiring actress to uncover the mysteries of her identity, leading them through a dreamlike, enigmatic journey in Los Angeles. Like I said, I love David Lynch, so I could not leave this off the list, and I do think it edges out Blue Velvet a little in terms of the noir aspect. There's a lot of uncanny in this film. It's sexy, it's mysterious, it's an enigmatic mystery box, it's surreal, there's a very complex narrative, brilliant performances, quite sexy too. I like my sexy films. I say a lot more about it in my Lynch video, but I also do a deep dive into it in my Uncanny Films video. You can check that out there. At number 4, we have Pulp Fiction from 1994, directed by Quentin Tarantino, starring John Travolta, Uma Thurman, Samuel L. Jackson, and Bruce Willis. Interwoven stories of crime, redemption, and violence unfold in a non-linear narrative, redefining genre conventions with sharp dialogue and memorable characters. This film subverts a lot of the noir tropes, which I appreciate. It has stellar, iconic performances. It is epic in scope. Aside from Kill Bill, this might be his most epic film. Maybe Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, epic in a different way. There's sharp, witty dialogue. I think this might be one of his best scripts. The nonlinear storytelling is a delight to watch, especially the first time. It has super memorable characters, iconic characters that are almost cartoons at this point because they've been parodied so many times and they're just so iconic. I love how he destroys the tropes, the kind of gangsters, the boxer that wants to throw his last fight, the normal people turning to crime. All of those things are just kind of turned on their head. Some people might be angry that I did not include Reservoir Dogs on this list, but I think it's more of a heist film with some noir elements, so I decided not to include it. I hope I didn't offend anybody, but I will say I love the film, so if that's any consolation. I am curious what Quentin's going to do for his last film. I would prefer if he went more noir instead of like cowboys or soldiers or that kind of thing, or kung fu. I thought his idea for the movie critic sounded a little bit like Taxi Driver kind of vibe. So I'm a little disappointed that he's changed his mind on that. Maybe he'll flip back to it. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Number 3, we have Blade Runner from 1982, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Harrison Ford, Rutger Hauer, and Sean Young. In a dystopian future, a Blade Runner must track down and retire rogue replicants, leading him to question the nature of humanity and his own existence. The groundbreaking visuals have still yet to be surpassed, in my opinion. It's got thought-provoking themes based off the Philip K. Dick book, and there's a memorable score by Vangelis, or is it Vangelis? I'm not sure how you say his name, but I love the score, the attention to detail, the art direction. It's all impeccable. It's a good balance between noir and sci-fi. I tried to stay mostly in the kind of noir vibe, but with Angel Heart, there's sort of horror, and Seven, there's horror. In this case, there's some science fiction. I say more about this film on my top 10 Gnostic films list. Yeah, I just think it's a beautiful film, and I like all the versions of it for different reasons. Yeah, I think it's great. And number 2, we have Taxi Driver from 1976, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro, Jodie Foster, Sybil Shepherd, and Harvey Keitel. A mentally unstable cab driver in New York City becomes increasingly disconnected from reality, leading him down a path of violence and obsession. So, while Basic Instinct kind of introduced me to Neo-Noir, I think, at least in the way that I knew that's what it was, whereas like Blade Runner, I didn't know that's what it was. When I saw it the first time, I was too young. I would say the same thing about this film. I saw it when I was too young to understand that this was actually noir, but I can't even remember the first time I saw this. I suspect I saw it when I shouldn't have. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's always been kind of part of my life. Back in those days, I feel like De Niro was the kind of iconic actor. I don't know if I feel the same way about him now. I feel like he's done 20 or 30 years of crap since then. There's an occasional role I think he's okay in, but like the first 10 years, 15 years of his career, I think he made some great films. I'm not sure, yeah, I just don't think he's invested as much as he used to be. But in this film, he's invested 100%. And so is Martin Scorsese, who I'm a big fan of. It's dark, gritty. I love films about urban decay because I come from Detroit, so I feel an affinity to it. It has psychological depth. I adore any film that is a character study where you get into one person. I think because I write stories, I like that kind of analysis that's going on, especially when there's kind of narration. The score in this film by Bernard Herrmann is legendary, and I listen to it quite often, like more than you would think. It has masterful direction. And I will say this, I think of the kind of legendary directors, Scorsese has made many films. And if you're going to like do a score of like, you know, how many films you've made and how many were actually good, I think his percentage is quite high. Even movies he puts out now that maybe aren't as good as, you know, his earlier films, I still think they blow other films out of the water. So yeah, take that for what it is. But at number 1, we have Chinatown from 1974, directed by Roman Polanski. A private investigator is drawn into a web of corruption and deceit while investigating a simple case of infidelity, uncovering dark secrets about power and greed in 1930s Los Angeles. So this is another one that's set in the time. However, when I think about this film, it just feels like the 70s to me. I don't know why. It reignited the genre, and some people would say that this is the first neo-noir film. It's rich and atmospheric. The kind of forces, economic forces that are manipulating the city, I think has been copied off of this film many times. One example I can think of would be the second season of True Detective. But the performances in this are great. Obviously, Jack Nicholson is a legend. I fell in love with Faye Dunaway in this film, who I think is maybe the greatest actress of her generation. If you've ever seen the film Network, you'll know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I mean, Mommy Dearest, Bonnie and Clyde, there are so many great films with her, and I think she's beautiful. And yeah, in this film, she gives a nuanced performance where you're not really sure what she's getting at and why she's getting at it. And often in these films, the femme fatale is just kind of bad for bad's sake, and I don't really think that's the case in this movie, which I think she does a good job of relating. Roman Polanski is an undeniable talent. I know there's lots of controversy around him. It's hard to dismiss films like this, or The Ninth Gate, or Repulsion, or Rosemary's Baby. They're just amazing films. So yeah, if you are upset by him, I don't know what to say, but as a director, he's great. This might be his best film, maybe. It's definitely up there. It's in the top 2 or 3, I think. Those are the 20 films. I will do a noir list at some point. I don't know if it will be 20. It'll probably be back to my normal 10, but we'll see. Once I start going through the list, maybe I'll have to do 20. I don't know. There are a lot of great noir films, and I have dug very deeply into that genre, so I do know quite a lot about it. So I don't know. We'll see. But that's all I got. If you have anything to say about any of these films, or if you think anything should have been mentioned that I didn't mention, you can say that in the comments. But that's all. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.